Before the jury was even invited to the party, Day 5 of testimony in Dedham began not in a well-timed entrance, but with a dialogue deluge of photographs. David Yannetti presented the judge to a weekend of discovery, a dossier of Katie McLaughlin and Caitlin Albert, which suggests more than an acquaintanceship. Turns out that high school friends was a modest way of saying they were track teammates in the same bridal party and also attended the same baby shower as recently as June 2021. Despite the defense essentially screaming perjury, Judge Cannoni remained the ultimate hall monitor, unfazed by the potential scandal. She proceeded by labeling the photos cumulative and deciding that the jury did not need a deep dive into McLaughlin's Instagram history just yet, then decided to pivot toward the day's main event, the Canton Connection, and a very noisy leaf blower. Welcome in, everybody. Before we get started, please like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell. You know, all the YouTubey things. Forget what you think you know about justice. Welcome to the Virtual Juror, where snark is reality, but evidence is royalty. Where at first we look at the FACS, or Facts and Conjecture Shared, before we get into the real stuff. After this brief interlude, the day began with Sidebar 31, yet again. Monday morning began with a head count and a reality check. While we started with 19 jurors, a group large enough to field a football team and a small coaching staff, the judge had to check if any of them had spent their weekend falling down the internet's various carrot and read rabbit holes. After Cannoni posed those same 3 questions about outside influences and whatnot, she noted for the record that 16 out of the 19 jurors answered affirmatively to having stayed away from information about this case. This revelation led immediately to a highly redacted sidebar, the judicial version of a top-secret folder, where the court likely spent quality time determining if the jury's state of mind had been contaminated by the very unnecessary chatter the judge spent all last week trying to prevent. In hindsight, we're left to wonder which 3 jurors might have encountered information about the Reed case, what it was, and if they were influenced. Considering the date for this was May 6, 2024, and a little preview for what's to come, 2 jurors were dismissed during this trial, but that did not happen until mid-June, over a month later. Were they the same jurors? We'll never know. Commonwealth Witness 13 was Lieutenant Paul Gallagher, a 32-year veteran of the Canton Police Force. He took the stand to explain the Commonwealth's innovative approach to crime scene processing. A leaf blower, red Solo cups, and a Stop and Shop bag. In perhaps the most Canton moment of the trial so far, Gallagher admitted that because the scene was a whiteout and the blood was frozen, and they didn't have any swabs handy, his team opted to skip the fancy kits and go with a leaf blower and party supplies, or what he referred to as large plastic evidence containers. We'll call them what they are: Solo cups. Gallagher's direct was a slow-motion tour of a snowy curb. Under the blistering cross-examination by AJ, the recusal of the Canton Police Department was exposed as being more of a suggestion than an actual recusal. Gallagher admitted that despite the department's supposed conflict of interest, he spent his morning calling Canton officers on their personal cell phones to help facilitate the investigation, otherwise known as the removal of Karen Reed's taillight for the MSP. Jackson also highlighted the don't ask, don't tell policy regarding the Albert residence when Gallagher confirmed the glaring absence of a warrant to enter the home, admitted to never photographing the interior, and never even bothering to check if there was a bulkhead door to the basement where the defense suggests the real action may have happened, making it clear that while the police were busy blowing snow and scooping up blood into party supplies, they never bothered to look inside the one house of which the victim was found on the front lawn, Apparently, he decided that the answer was definitely under the snow and not behind the front door. On direct, the defense objected 5 times. 1 was allowed and 4 were sustained. On cross, the Commonwealth objected 12 times. 6 were allowed, 1 with an unsuccessful motion to strike, and 6 were sustained. Also on cross, the defense objected 1 time to a non-responsive answer, and that was also sustained. On redirect, there were no objections. On recross, the Commonwealth objected twice. 1 was sustained, 1 was allowed. During Gallagher's testimony, there were at least 8 sidebars and 1 discussion outside the presence of the jury. So, here we go. Just as Adam Lally was preparing to drown the jury in a sea of crime scene photos, the Norfolk Superior Court's technology decided to join the defense's motion to dismiss. What followed was a pair of sidebars that felt less like an elimination trial and more like an emergency meeting with the high school yearbook committee. Lally, in a rare moment of mercy for the court clerk, asked during Sidebar 32 if he could just show the photos to the jury using the numbers already printed on them before officially marking them for the record. But before the judge could even rule on this shortcut, the clerk dropped a bombshell. The FTR, otherwise known as for the record, it's a recording system, was dead. The clock is frozen, the clerk warned, essentially telling the court that if a tree falls in the courtroom and the FTR isn't recording, it didn't happen. While Torrey and the clerk desperately tried to reboot the 21st century, Judge Cannoni called everyone back to a huddle for Sidebar 33. It turns out the court reporter, remember our friend Nancy, was having a mild panic attack over Lally's plan. She rightly pointed out that if Lally started calling an exhibit number 5 when it was actually going to be exhibit number 18, the transcript would look like a game of Sudoku gone wrong. The judge, suddenly a champion of clerical clarity, sided with the reporter, saying, "I agree with her. I think it will be confusing." Rather than trusting the numbers on the screen, the judge ordered Lally to physically walk over to the clerk and point out exactly which photos he wanted to publish. It was a low-tech solution for a high-tech glitch, forcing the Commonwealth to slow down and actually organize its slideshow. Being temporarily defeated by a frozen clock, Lally tried to save time, but the computers said no, and the judge had to protect the transcript from a numbering disaster that would have given the appellate courts a migraine. For a few minutes, the most important person in the room wasn't the witness, or the lawyers, or even the defendant. It was the IT guy. We paused for some digital CPR, so the record would accurately reflect every single snowflake Lieutenant Gallagher blew away with his leaf blower. And just when the judge thought she'd survived the technological apocalypse of the FTR crash, the Commonwealth entered a new level of exhibit purgatory. Sidebars 34 and 35 proved that in this trial, the most dangerous weapon is not a cocktail glass or a taillight. It's a labeling gun, in the hands of someone who has lost track of the alphabet. Adam Lally tried to play it cool by introducing a disc of crime scene videos in Sidebar 34. Jackson, playing the role of the skeptical consumer, just wanted to know how many mini-movies he was about to watch. Lally admitted the footage was broken up into small snippets, essentially promising a cinematic experience as fragmented as the morning's testimony. Jackson gave a procedural whatever shrug, but Judge Cannoni was already eyeing the exhibit pile with deep suspicion. The judge's intuition was spot on. She pointed out that while Lally was busy showing the witness photo number 20, that number was actually occupied by Becker's report from the previous day. Lally, caught up in a numbering trap of his own making, gave a sheepish, "I may have inadvertently reused the number." The judge, now acting as the court's lead auditor, told them to go figure out their duplicates during a break. 5 minutes later, Lally was back at the bench in a cold sweat during Sidebar 35. "We have two 20s, he confessed, initially trying to pin the mistake on our favorite court reporter. Cannoni shut that down immediately. "No, she did not. That was pre-marked by you." Since Lally had pre-marked the photo himself, the judge had to perform an evidentiary surgical strike. To keep the jury from realizing that they were watching wreckage in numerical form, she ordered the new photo to be marked 20A. It was a band-aid on a bullet wound of clerical errors, intended to match what the jurors had already seen on the screen. We've reached the choose-your-own-adventure stage of the evidence locker. Lally is pre-marking photos with numbers that already exist. Jackson is letting it slide just to keep the wheels turning, and the judge is inventing A and B versions of evidence just to save face in front of 19 jurors. It was a 5-minute instruction in how to compound the problem while trying to fix it. We officially have a 20 and a 20A, because in Canton, why have one piece of evidence when you can have two with the same name? At this point, the judge realized this was going to take longer than expected. So, once the 19-member jury was safely out of the room, likely to search for a stronger Wi-Fi signal or a snack, the judge turned her attention to the absolute shambles that was the Commonwealth's evidence presentation. It turns out that processing a crime scene with a leaf blower is actually easier than getting a video to play in a Norfolk County courtroom. The judge started with a basic pro tip for Adam Lally. If you want a sticker on an exhibit, you have to actually take it out of the envelope first. She pleaded with him to do this as the court continued to drown in a sea of bubble wrap and manila folders that were compounding the problem of the morning's clerical crash. The technology revolt was officially in full swing. The FTR system was still on strike, and the courtroom's internet had apparently decided to recuse itself entirely. Cannoni, now playing the role of frustrated IT manager, asked if a flash drive would help, but Lally admitted that his videos were just too big for the courtroom's aging hardware to handle. In a moment of unintentional comedy, Lally confessed that while he was playing the videos for the witness, he could not actually see anything on the screen from where he was standing. He noted that the footage doesn't appear that dark when you put it on a laptop, which is a comforting thought for anyone who isn't a juror trying to see a blurry body in a snowbank from 20 feet away. When the judge admitted she couldn't even open Lally's files on her work computer that morning, she did what any sane person does when the printer jams and the Wi-Fi dies. She called for a 10-minute timeout. We've reached the "have you tried turning it off and back on again" stage of this trial. Between the FTR meltdown, the Exhibit 20A sticker crisis, and Lally's invisible videos, the Commonwealth's case is currently being held together by Scotch tape and a prayer. The judge has officially been defeated by a file size, proving that while you can lead a prosecutor to a laptop, you cannot make the courtroom technology actually play the evidence. Guess we'll see the jury in 10 minutes, or whenever the 21st century decides to return to Dedham. While Adam Lally was trying to play a game of telephone through Lieutenant Gallagher, Cannoni stepped in during Sidebar 36 to remind the Commonwealth that courtroom testimony isn't supposed to be a relay race of rumors. Lally was attempting to bridge the gap between Chief Berkowitz and the ever-controversial Sergeant Lank, but he hit a wall of hearsay. Judge Cannoni, cutting straight to the chase, asked Jackson if this was a straight hearsay objection. Jackson gave a crisp correct, while the judge noted that Lally hadn't exactly laid the foundation for Gallagher to testify about conversations he wasn't really a part of. Lally explained his grand plan. He just wanted to show how the investigation moved from Berkowitz to Lank, who allegedly recovered the items. However, the judge pointed out a major flaw in the chain of custody. Lank didn't give the items to Gallagher. He left them for someone else. When Lally tried to argue that Gallagher was the one who told the chief that Lank was working that day, Cannoni realized that Lally had already gotten the point across. So she shut down the hearsay before it could further contaminate the record. Lally tried to turn Lieutenant Gallagher into a human GPS to lead the jury to Sergeant Lank, but the judge pulled the plug on the navigation. We don't need a witness to testify about what he told the chief about what Lank was doing when Lank is perfectly capable of coming in and telling us himself, assuming he can remember. The judge has once again trimmed the unnecessary chatter, keeping the Commonwealth's game of evidentiary hopscotch from getting out of hand. Onward to the next small snippet of video. Alan Jackson was starting to peel back the layers of the supervision onion when Adam Lally sprinted to the bench for Sidebar 37 to protect the chain of command, or at least the illusion of it. This sidebar was a battle over what a boss should actually know about their employees' extracurricular activities. Lally's objection was a two-pronged attempt at a shield. First, he argued that Lieutenant Gallagher could not possibly know what Sergeant Lank was doing before Gallagher arrived on the scene. And second, he seemed to suggest that Gallagher shouldn't be responsible for Lank's personal history with the Albert family. The judge cut through the fog by asking the million-dollar question: is it in the report Lank wrote? Jackson jumped on this, arguing that as a supervisor, Gallagher should have known about Lank's cozy relationship with the Alberts if he'd bothered to read the paperwork, or more importantly, if Lank had simply told him, hey, I've already handled these people. Jackson's ultimate goal was to expose the redundancy, or the cover-up. He wanted to know why Gallagher tasked Lance with doing things that had supposedly already been done. If he says, I didn't know, then I'll live with that, Jackson promised, essentially setting a trap for the lieutenant to admit he was either out of the loop or willingly ignorant. Judge Cannoni, perhaps sensing the I didn't know is a perfectly valid, if embarrassing, answer for a supervisor, overruled Lally. I'm going to allow it, she said, giving Jackson the green light to ask Gallagher if he had any idea what his boots on the ground were actually up to. We've moved from solo cup forensics to middle management mysteries. Lally tried to argue that the lieutenant shouldn't be expected to know what his sergeant was doing, which is a crazy strategy for a police-led investigation. The judge decided that if the supervisor wants to claim ignorance on the stand, he's more than welcome to do so in front of 19 jurors. Jackson is now free to ask Gallagher if the Canton PD was actually leading the investigation or if they were just along for the ride while Sergeant Lank handled the local details. The courtroom was settling into the rhythmic drone of police procedure as Judge Cannoni hit the pause button, again, for a logistical reality check in Sidebar 38. This wasn't a sidebar about high-level legal strategy. It was about the physical limitations of a courthouse that apparently doubles as a labyrinth. Judge Cannoni pulled the lawyers in to explain that dismissing the 19 jurors for a break isn't as simple as opening a door because of the courthouse's layout. The jury has to be paraded through another courtroom just to reach their destination. In a rare moment of total harmony, both Alan Jackson and Adam Lally offered their sincere thanks. Whether they were grateful for the stretch or just relieved to stop talking about solo cups for 6 seconds, the sentiment was unanimous. You know the trial is moving at a glacial pace when the highlight of the hour is a detailed explanation of the jury's walking route. Cannoni gave the lawyers 10 minutes to rethink their lives while the 19 jurors took the scenic route through the building. It's the ultimate Dedham power move. The trial stops because the architecture says so. Commonwealth Witness 14 is Sergeant Goode. Can you believe the current update on this man? I hope he's enjoying his life on his couch. He arrived with a dashcam view of the chaotic scene, which mostly reminded everyone it was indeed snowing on January 29th. While Lally focused on identifying the blurry figures of Jennifer McCabe and Carrie Roberts in the dark, Yannetti used his cross to drive a truck through the Commonwealth's confession narrative. Yannetti established that Goode was on the scene for roughly 100 minutes of eerily quiet wind. Nearly 2 hours of professional eavesdropping, and despite his 18 years of training to listen to important details, he never, not even once, heard Karen Reed scream, "I hit him." Yannetti leaned into the Canton Connection, getting Goode to admit he's been working alongside Kevin Albert, Brian Albert's brother, for 18 years, making his visit to Brian's home less of an investigation and more like a family reunion. In this trial, it seems unbiased is just another way of saying, I've known the witness's brother since the early 2000s, or even before that. We're going to stop tracking the objections just because it's time-consuming, and I believe you guys get the idea now. There were a lot of objections. A lot were sustained. A lot were allowed. And sometimes it seemed one way or the other. With the clock ticking and the 19-member jury probably wondering if they'd be home in time for dinner, the judge called a huddle, or what we call Sidebar 39, to play legal Tetris with the schedule. This sidebar was all about managing expectations and making sure Sergeant Lank's origin story didn't derail the entire week. Judge Cannoni, understanding that the morning's Solo Cup saga had moved at the pace of melting permafrost, asked Lally for a reality check. Lally admitted that the current witness, Sergeant Goode, would definitely blow past the lunch hour. When asked about his cross-examination, David Yannetti didn't mince words. He said there's no doubt that it would be long, estimating he'd need at least as much time as Jackson took to grill Gallagher. The judge, ever the strategist, saw an opening to satisfy her own curiosity about Sergeant Lank's 2002 bar fight history, without boring the jury to tears. She proposed a deal. They would finish what they could with Goode, send the jury home early to avoid the unnecessary jabbering of a legal argument, and then conduct a voir dire of Lank in a jury-free courtroom. Lally agreed that getting this secret testimony out of the way today made sense so that Lank could hit the ground running, or at least hitting the stand, tomorrow morning. Cannoni officially moved into Friday mode on a Monday. She's giving the 19 jurors an early pass so the lawyers can stay behind and fight about what happened at a bar 22 years ago. It's the ultimate courtroom trade-off. The jury gets their freedom, and the lawyers get to perform their Lank audition for an audience of one. We're clearing the deck for the hidden track of the day. Stay tuned for more amnesia. When the courtroom started to smell like a mix of wet wool and desperation, the judge called for the luncheon recess. But before anyone could escape for a sandwich, there was the matter of the Commonwealth's witness waiting room, which was apparently becoming quite crowded. Adam Lally, ever the optimist, or perhaps just a glutton for scheduling punishment, revealed that he had a number of other witnesses lurking in the wings. He asked for permission to release the ones who didn't have a prayer of testifying today. Specifically, everyone except the current witness, Sean Goode, and the next in line, Lieutenant Ray, and the star of the afternoon, Sergeant Lank. David Yannetti, likely calculating how many more hours he could spend dissecting dashcam footage, chimed in with a dose of reality. I really don't think we're going to get to anybody else. Seeing that the day was destined to be swallowed by Sergeant Goode's cross-examination and the upcoming Lank voir dire, the judge gave Lally the green light to send the civilian witnesses home. It was a judicial act of mercy, sparing the local residents from spending another afternoon staring at the courthouse wallpaper while the lawyers argued about solo cups and 22-year-old bar fights. The afternoon's double feature was officially set. Finished what they could of the Goode-Yannetti sparring match, a quick cameo by Lieutenant Ray, spoiler alert, they didn't actually get to him, and then the main event, the jury-free interrogation of Sergeant Lank. Lally had a full bench of witnesses, but Cannoni and Yannetti knew better. At the rate this trial moves, a short witness is a mythical creature. And the only thing being released faster than the evidence were the civilians who realized they weren't going to be part of today's hot seat hoedown. We're heading into the afternoon with a leaner lineup and a date with a 2002 police report. Bon appetit! As David Yannetti thought he had Sergeant Goode cornered with a specific police report, the judge stepped in for Sidebar 40 to remind everyone that just because a piece of paper exists doesn't mean the person on the stand actually wrote it. This sidebar was a lesson in right report, wrong trooper. Yannetti tried to confront Goode with a specific paragraph from an accident reconstruction report. The judge, ever the skeptic, asked the billion-dollar question. Who wrote this report? The answer? Not Sergeant Goode. It was the yet-to-be-seen, and highly anticipated, Trooper Paul. Judge Cannoni, clearly weary of the evidentiary issues, gave Yannetti a light rap on the knuckles. Some of what causes difficulty is asking questions of the wrong witness, she noted. She pointed out that since Goode didn't adopt or write the report, Yannetti was essentially trying to grill a vegan about a steak recipe. Lally jumped in to defend the honor of his reports, explaining that just because Goode was listed as a primary investigator in Trooper Paul's reconstruction write-up doesn't mean Goode actually did any of the math. According to Lally, the recon expert just lists who they talked to on the scene, not who's responsible for the physics. Facing a judicial no, Yannetti played it cool. I'll ask another couple questions just to get out of it, and then I'll move on, he promised, retreating from the report before the judge could officially bench him for the inning. Lally couldn't resist a parting shot, remarking, "I would assume Mr. Yannetti knows this," to which Yannetti simply offered a dry, "I did not." Yannetti tried to play gotcha with a document Sergeant Goode apparently only read for the plot. Judge Cannoni wasn't having it, reminding the defense that they'll have to wait for Trooper Paul to arrive before they can start tearing apart the reconstruction narrative. For now, Sergeant Goode remains the wrong witness, and Yannetti has to find a different way to squeeze the Canton Connection for more juice. Onward to the next, oops, wrong guy, moment. Just as the defense prepared to make their own cinematic masterpiece for the jury, the judge called a quick huddle in Sidebar 49 to perform a forensic audit of the video's credits. This sidebar was a brief interrogation into the defense's editing suite to ensure no Hollywood magic had been applied to the evidence. Judge Cannoni, with an eye for detail that would put a film editor to shame, pointed out that the video didn't exactly look like raw police footage. It was conveniently labeled Officer Seraph Dashcam and Officer Goode Dashcam, labels that don't actually exist in the state police's world of anonymous serial numbers. The judge noted that the defense had essentially created a split screen or sequential supercut of two different cameras. She wanted to know if the editing stopped at the labels or if there were any deleted scenes or CGI taillights added to the mix. Alan Jackson and David Yannetti assured the court that the only alterations were for the sake of the 19 jurors' sanity. They confirmed it was just a matter of labeling and synchronization, syncing the two perspectives so the jury wouldn't have to do the mental math of a timeline. Satisfied that the defense wasn't using filters or deceptive cuts, the judge gave it the official stamp of approval. The Frankenstein dash cam was christened Exhibit 16 and prepared for its big screen debut. The defense tried to make the evidence user-friendly by adding labels, and the judge almost sent them to the principal's office for it. In a trial where every sticker is a battle and Exhibit 20 has a twin brother named 20A, the judge wanted to make sure that the dashcam wasn't getting a director's cut treatment. Thankfully, it was just a bit of synchronization and the only thing in this trial that seems to be operating on the same timeline. Roll film. When David Yannetti was preparing to pull a rabbit out of his hat, or rather a piece of taillight out of a police report, the judge once again summoned everyone to the bench for a reality check. This sidebar, number 42, was a high-stakes game of show me your cards, played in the shadow of a ticking clock. Lally kicked things off by complaining that Yannetti was basically reading a police report like a bedtime story. The judge, ever the enforcer of the rules, reminded Yannetti that if the Commonwealth tried to smuggle in a police report into evidence, she would shoot them right down. She demanded to know why the report was being referenced if it wasn't actually an exhibit. Yannetti finally revealed his hand. He was comparing the official police photos to a version that appeared to have been, shall we say, enhanced. He claimed to have a photo showing a piece of taillight that was not in the original photo. It was a jarring moment, suggesting that the evidence might be growing legs, or shards, in between camera clicks. Realizing that Yannetti's magic taillight trick was going to take a few minutes and require the witness to actually look at the evidence for the first time, the judge decided to call it a day for the jury. "Why don't we just bring him back tomorrow?" she suggested, prioritizing the secret track of the day, the Lank voir dire. Yannetti had a momentary crisis of faith, worried that by explaining his move at Sidebar, he had shown his cards to Lally. He feared the Commonwealth would spend the evening prepping Sergeant Goode on how to explain away the disappearing, reappearing taillight. Cannoni offered a blunt comfort. "I don't think you have shown your cards because it wasn't at all clear to me what you were doing." The judge stood firm on her plan to clear the room. She wanted the jury gone so she could finally deal with the 2002 bar fight drama of Sergeant Lank without any unnecessary chatter from the 19-member peanut gallery. Bottom line, Yannetti tried to launch a forensic sneak attack, but the judge essentially told him, "I have no idea what you're talking about, so go back to your desk." The jury was sent packing so the adults could stay late and talk about what really happens to evidence photos in Canton. We're ending the day on a cliffhanger. The mystery of the different photo and the long-awaited arrival of Sergeant Lank. Don't worry, David. If the judge didn't understand your strategy, there's a good chance Lally didn't either. See you at the voir dire. With the 19 jurors finally paraded out of the building and the clock ticking toward the hour where the courthouse staff starts eyeing the exits, the judge turned the room into an exclusive jury-free theater for the day's final act. First things first. The judge had to deliver the bad news to Sergeant Goode. His time in the hot seat wasn't over. This means we'll have to bring him back tomorrow, effectively inviting him back for another round of Yannetti's magic taillight slideshow in the morning. The judge, realizing she was now keeping the staff longer than necessary, laid down the law for the upcoming voir dire of Sergeant Lank. She had hoped for an earlier start, but the morning's alphabet soup and the technology tantrums had eaten into the schedule. Her solution? A legal speed dating format. She allotted a mere 10 to 15 minutes for each side to grill Lank on his 2002 bar fight heroics. 10 minutes would be great from each of you, she pleaded, hoping to hear the arguments and get everyone out before the building turned into a pumpkin. Alan Jackson, ever the closer, gave a crisp, "That's fine," while Lally stood ready to defend the relevance, or lack thereof, of a 2-decade-old drama. We've reached the overtime portion of the day. The jury is gone, the sun is ready to start the end of its day, and the judge is trying to squeeze a 22-year-old controversy into a 20-minute window. It's a high-speed interrogation designed to see if Sergeant Lank's origin story is fit for public consumption, or if it should stay buried in the 2002 archives. Grab your coffee. The Lank show is finally starting. But Judge Cannoni has the hook ready if they go a second over their time limit. So, with the courthouse staff checking their watches and the 19 jurors safely off the clock, the judge turned the room over to Alan Jackson for the much-anticipated voir dire of Sergeant Michael Lank. It wasn't just a testimony, it was a journey back to August of 2002, a simpler time of low-rise jeans, off-duty drinking, and apparently a very intense loyalty to the Albert family. Jackson started by reading through the Albert family tree. Lank admitted he has known Tim, Chris, and Brian Albert since they were kids. While he described his relationship with Brian as merely civil, he confessed that Chris was a pretty good friend, well into their 20s. He tried to dodge the drinking buddy label, but admitted they'd certainly socialized and imbibed together in the past. The core of the interrogation was an August night 22 years ago. Lank was off duty and had been drinking at a bar when his buddy Chris Albert approached Lank's personal vehicle. Chris was complaining about a previous fracas with the Lopalato brothers. When the Lopalatos appeared down the street, Lank, despite having a few drinks, decided it was time to activate his police powers. Jackson pulled no punches in describing the melee that followed. He laid out the Lopalatos' version of events, that Lank didn't just break up a fight, but allegedly punched, beat, and bit Mark Lopalato to the point of drawing blood. And for a grand finale, Jackson alleged that once Alfred Lopalato was handcuffed and incapacitated by other officers, Lank walked over and spat in his face. Lank's defense? I believe that was his allegation, yes. The fallout of this assistance to Chris Albert was a mess of litigation. Lank was sued in federal court, a case he admitted was settled under a non-disclosure agreement. Even more telling, the criminal charges against the Lopalatos for assaulting Lank ended. In a move that Jackson framed as pure witness intimidation, Lank admitted to arresting the brothers again, later at a gas station after a brief verbal exchange. Those charges, unsurprisingly, were thrown out by the DA. Jackson's final spear was aimed at the heart of the Canton recusal. He asked if Lank would have gone to these extraordinary lengths, the punching, the biting, the spitting, and the follow-up arrests, for a regular, random guy off the street. Lank, with a straight face, answered, absolutely. We've officially entered the origin story of the Canton investigation. According to Sergeant Lank, he's just a helpful childhood friend who happens to punch, bite, and spit in the line of duty, even when he's off duty and has been imbibing. The judge now has to decide if this 22-year-old bar fight is a thin cloth or a smoking gun of bias. If I were the Lopalato brothers, I'd probably be watching this trial with a very large bowl of popcorn. Just as Alan Jackson finished painting a portrait of Sergeant Michael Lank as the Albert family's personal fixer, Adam Lally stepped up to the plate to perform some aggressive damage control. This was Lally's attempt to show that Lank isn't just a loyal soldier in the Canton Connection, but a cop who, on at least one occasion, actually remembered which side of the law he worked for. Lally's gotcha moment for the defense was a trip to 2012. He had Lank reveal that he actually brought charges against Tim Albert a decade ago. It was the ultimate "I'm not a fanboy" defense. Lally even managed to tie in the morning's previous witness, Sergeant Sean Goode, noting that the two of them worked that investigation together. Apparently, in Canton, you haven't officially made it as a police officer until you've participated in at least one Albert family booking. Lally tried to scrub the stain of the 2002 federal lawsuit by pointing out that the settlement was just a business transaction. No finding of liability, no "oops, I bit a guy" admission, just a check cut and a non-disclosure agreement signed. In the Commonwealth's eyes, if the court didn't officially label it bad behavior, it didn't happen. Lally doubled down on his distance from Brian Albert, describing their relationship as merely civil. He then threw in a teaser for a Real Housewives of Canton storyline, claiming that he and Brian have actually had disagreements in the past. He insisted that until the morning John O'Keefe was found, he had never even set foot inside 34 Fairview. Lally closed by asking the million-dollar question. Did Lank's lifelong history with the Alberts change a single thing about how he handled the investigation on January 29th? Lank gave the expected ironclad no. According to Lank, the leaf blowers, the red solo cups, and the personal cell phone calls to the Alberts were all part of his standard, unbiased playbook. Lally's strategy is simple. How could he be a biased fixer if he arrested Tim Albert 12 years ago? It's a bold move to use one Albert's arrest to cancel out 20 years of drinking buddy status and a federal lawsuit involving biting and spitting. The judge has to decide if this 2012 arrest is enough to scrub the 2002 bar fight from the record. We're ending the day with the quintessential Canton paradox. Everyone knows everyone. Everyone has sued everyone, but everyone is civil enough to keep the investigation in the family. When Adam Lally thought he had scored a point by showing Sergeant Lank once arrested an Albert, Alan Jackson returned to the lectern to show that even a Canton arrest comes with a side of local hospitality. This final round of voir dire turned a 2012 traffic accident into a masterclass in doing the bare minimum. Jackson quickly dismantled the idea that Lank was a relentless bloodhound. It turns out that finding Tim Albert after he smashed into a car didn't require high-level detective work. Lank simply followed a trail of transmission fluid that led, like a neon sign, straight to 34 Fairview, the very house where John O'Keefe would be found a decade later. When Lank caught up to Tim at Brian Albert's house, Tim's high-level legal defense was essentially, "I'm really sorry I panicked." In the world of Canton policing, this explanation apparently carried enough weight to bypass the usual rigmarole of a fleeing-the-scene investigation. Jackson grilled Lank on why a guy who just hit a car and fled wasn't given the full treatment. Lank admitted there were no field sobriety tests, no breathalyzer, and no blood test. He tried to play the "I don't recall what Sergeant Goode did" card, but Jackson hammered home that as far as Lank was concerned, a hit and run on a vehicle with a woman inside didn't warrant a full-blown DUI investigation. The arrest that Lally touted as proof of impartiality resulted in a mere misdemeanor. Jackson suggested the case ended in diversion and a wiped clean record, a slap on the wrist that Lank claimed he couldn't recall. Lally tried to use the 2012 incident to prove Lank was an equal opportunity arrester, but Jackson turned it into a Canton participation trophy. Lank didn't find Tim Albert. He just followed the leaking oil to the Albert family doorstep. Once there, the investigation apparently consisted of a police chat and a total skip on sobriety tests. It turns out that in Canton, doing your job involves letting a hit-and-run driver off with a misdemeanor and a "don't worry about it," as long as they're parked at 34 Fairview. With Sergeant Lank finally excused from his audition, the lawyers stayed late for one last sparring match over whether the jury should ever hear about the biting, the spitting, or even the transmission fluid. This was the legal equivalent of a post-game show, where the judge tried to decide if the 2002 melee was a relevant backstory or just a mini-trial distraction. Alan Jackson argued that the 22-year-old gap doesn't make the incident irrelevant. It makes it worse. In Jackson's view, Lank deputized himself for his friend Chris Albert in 2002, establishing a pattern of using his badge to protect the family. He pointed out that Lank was the very first officer to walk into 34 Fairview on the morning John O'Keefe was found, conducting unrecorded interviews with a family he's been imbibing with for decades. The judge expressed judicial anxiety. She didn't want a mini-trial within a trial. She worried that bringing in the Lopalato brothers to testify about being ignored at the police station would lead the jury too far afield from the actual elimination trial. Jackson tried to negotiate, offering to bring in just one Lopalato brother as a witness to establish the bias. Adam Lally, sounding like a man who just wanted to go home, argued that the defense was weaving bias out of thin cloth. He downplayed Lank's role, essentially framing him as a glorified note-taker who just assisted the real investigators. Lally's logic? Chris Albert wasn't even at the house that night, so why does a fight from 2002 matter? Judge Cannoni wasn't buying Lally's nothing-to-see-here routine. "I disagree with you," she told the prosecutor. She noted that because this specifically involves the Albert family, it falls under different rules for proving bias. However, she wasn't ready to rule just yet. The judge ended the day by giving the defense a deadline. She demanded to see the 2002 police reports for herself before making a final call. She's certainly setting the stage for a high-stakes Tuesday morning. Day 5 of testimony ended with a cliffhanger. Jackson thinks the 2002 bar fight is the rosebud of the Canton investigation. Lally thinks it's ancient history. and the judge is currently the one with the power to decide if the jury gets to see the director's cut of Sergeant Lank's career. The defense is now scrambling to find 22-year-old paperwork before the morning bell rings. Grab your reading glasses. Tomorrow starts with a literal paper chase. In conclusion, Day 5 was more improvisational policing and proved that 19 jurors are 19 people too many to keep away from the internet, and that a recusal in Canton is as thin as the paper the invisible warrant was printed on. We learned that a leaf blower is a legitimate forensic tool, and that solo cups are a synonym for an evidence locker. So if you don't have a warrant, they'll do in a pinch. We also found out that the recusal of the police was remarkably flexible when taillight pieces needed finding and the witnesses needed talking to. Oh, and shockingly, that 100 minutes of police presence was not enough time to hear a confession that only the prosecution's besties seemed to remember. The Gatekeeper spent half the day fixing computer glitches and the other half trying to manage a numbering system that would confuse a toddler. As we headed into the weekend light of a Monday afternoon, the jury was sent home with visions of snowbanks. And the lawyers stayed behind and will now wait on a ruling of the origin story of Sergeant Lank's bias, the 2002 bar fight. The alphabet of evidence remains a sticky mess, and Nancy is still the most famous name in the courtroom to date. See you later. Don't forget your stickers. Well, that's all we have. So as always, love your family, love your pets, love your neighbors, and we'll see you next time.
Standing here in the shadows of doubt, wheels of fate turning, can't figure it out. Hands are heavy, hearts are stone. This weight I carry, can't do it alone.